So, Corinne, welcome to the podcast. You're certainly someone who's played for a long time and is well respected around the domestic leagues in Australia. However, you do bring something different to most cricketers in your incredible talent as an artist, demonstrated in your book Victress. I reckon my artistic talent extends to poor stick figures. So, I'd love, and I don't know many athletes who are really talented in the art space. So, I'd love to get stuck into your background story of how you actually got into illustrating in the first place.
Well, thank you for having me, Barbie. I'm very happy to be here. I guess art for me was always a way I found easiest to express myself. I was quite a shy, introverted kid growing up, and I really didn't know how to express myself, even to the people closest around me. And I think I found a way to do that through art and through creating things for people to show how much I cared about them. So I think for me, it was a tool that I found really helpful in conveying my emotions and feelings, but also trying to understand myself initially. I haven't got any training, so I started out as drawing stick figures, just like you seem to be an expert at, and then I basically just taught myself through practice and repetition, and I guess I've got my own unique style because it's not refined in any way.
I think saying I'm an expert at stick figures is still a stretch, but how does an introverted kid, as you mentioned, with no training, end up illustrating and publishing a book on the legendary woman in sport?
I think it's probably a complete accident, if I'm honest, Barbie. No, I guess there's a bit behind it. We had a great team involved in Victress. So the project started out as a personal project for me. I quite like to draw a lot throughout Big Bash. We weren't playing that well, and for me, it's a drawing as an escape. That's the only time when my mind completely switches off. And I think particularly being in a leadership role, you can be so caught up in meetings off field, in trying to get your team on board with where we're going as a group. And I'm quite a sensitive person, so I take on a lot of people's problems and feelings. And for me, drawing was my release. It was the way I refilled my bucket. And throughout, we had one Big Bash tournament. We weren't playing so well. We were halfway through, and we just come off another loss, and we should have won that game. And as a leader, I wasn't performing the way I wanted to, so I was quite down on myself. And I remember during my pity party that I was having for myself, I had this real sense of clarity and a real switch in mindset, and I felt really grateful for the position I was in. I was someone who played cricket for the love of it growing up, and sort of experienced the full progression of the professionalism of the game. And it sort of made me think about the people that had come before me, that had given me that opportunity to play the sport I love as my job. And I started drawing Dawn Fraser. She was the first person I drew. I think she's the matriarch of female sport in Australia, and someone that pretty much everyone respects in one way or another. And from there, I wrote a list of people that I felt had paved the way for me to have the opportunities I had, and started drawing them. I shared what I was doing with one of my good friends, Lisa Stalaker, who I often get her to critique my drawings and give me feedback. And she thought it'd be, a great idea for a coffee table book. And I didn't really believe it at the time. And I spoke with Silvio, and he had the same train of thought at the exact same time. They were both thinking the same thing. And Silvio is a master of making the impossible happen. And, he got Cricket Australia on board to, sponsor the publishing of the book. And Michael Randall, who's a great writer for the Herald Sun in Melbourne, he jumped on board and was equally passionate about sharing these stories. So we had a great team around us, and it felt like Victress was a product of all those great people with the great intention of celebrating these women.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like, as you said, it was a bit of an escape for you, and it's something that you did in your own time. Did you have any sort of anxiety or nerves about the public seeing these drawings of yours?
Absolutely. I had many countless nights where I lost sleep over whether I was doing these people justice. Obviously, I didn't know a lot of them. I knew a few of the women in the book, but I had to introduce myself, and I was just this, young sort of nobody from Newcastle approaching one of the greatest basketballers of all time in Lauren Jackson, saying, "Hey, I've drawn a portrait of you. Would you mind me sharing it with the world? And also, can you give me a quote on kindness?" So there there was a couple of daunting moments in the whole process of the book. And for me, I just felt a huge sense of pressure to get it right, because I really respect and admire the women in the book, and I wanted to make sure I was conveying their impact, and that not only that they've had on me, but on Australian female sport. So there was a lot of pressure around that, and I'm not a writer. I wouldn't even consider myself an illustrator. I sort of just saw it as a hobby and a quite a selfish passion, really. Yeah, there was a lot of times where I was like, oh, I've got to fix this. I've got to do that nose better. I've got to, give a bit more color in the face or whatever. But I think having a bigger meaning to the book as well. So I guess doing this, I wanted to celebrate those women and thank them. But I also was a kid, 9 or 10, and there was no sort of books or any sort of, I guess, material around celebrating women in sport when I was a kid. So for me, it was about trying to give the next generation that exposure to these women. And I thought it was particularly important in this time where things are becoming really professional, where we remember the people that got us there. So there was that purpose. And then also combining with the Kindness Factory, which is a foundation I'm hugely passionate about. And, being able to sort of do something to help them was also a big driver in the project.
Yeah, and I'd love to dig into the Kindness Factory a little bit. So within the book, every athlete that you've drawn has a quote on kindness, which I absolutely love. But the Kindness Factory story is Kath Cashel, who I know is one of your best mates. It's one of the most ridiculous stories anyone's ever heard. So if the listeners haven't heard about Kath Cashel, just Google her, listen to her speak. It's unbelievable. Broken back twice. She lost her partner to suicide. And we actually had our last guest on this podcast, Will Stibbs, has probably had a story that rivals Kath. I didn't think it was possible. And he spoke a lot about one of the aspects in his life was actually his best friend battling brain cancer. And he spoke a lot about the grief as someone supporting him. So he took him to all his chemo sessions. He did a lot of his rehab with him, but he never really processed the amount of grief and the amount of emotions that he had bottled up inside as a supporter of someone going through such a tough time. So I'd love to know from your point of view, Kath's story's been put out there quite a bit, but as someone so close to her, how did you actually manage that period over 3 years or so, where she just kept getting hit?
Yeah, I think, well, firstly, Kath is a very special person, and I love her to death. I think she's been through more than most people go through in 10 lifetimes. So she's a remarkable woman. I think as her friend, it was really helpless to watch her go through that. And then to see not only one thing happen and then another thing happen, but they just kept happening. And it was over a 3 to 4 year period where the biggest things in someone's life were happening to her over and over again. And every time she built herself back up and got back up, something would come from nowhere that she couldn't control and just smack her back down again. And I found it, I think there were times there where I just had no clue what to do. And it's funny, I was just thinking about it then, the thing I turned to was art. And I remember she was in rehab for the first time, breaking her back, and she sort of just became quite distant and couldn't really get in contact with her. And she, speaking to her later on, it was because she didn't want to worry us, she didn't want to concern us, she knew she wasn't in a great place, and she felt like just distancing herself would help us. But I found that more difficult, not knowing what she was going through, how she was doing, what she needed to help, so that we could best support her. And I ended up sort of just creating this book, and I got pictures from all of our friendships over the years, and got the most important people in her life to send her a message, and I put it together in a collage book, and I ended up getting when she got out of the rehab facility, getting to see her for a minute. It was hard to get in contact with her because, again, she was trying to protect her. She didn't want us to see her in her worst state. And at that point, she was literally willing herself with each step to walk. She was on crutches, could barely move a leg. Had coffee with her, and I gave her this book, and she was really touched by it. And I don't know, for me, again, it was just me showing her I'm always here for her. There's so many people around her if she needs them to lean on. So I think powerless is a great word that kept coming up. Like you just felt like you couldn't do anything to take away the hurt and the pain and the grief that she was experiencing. And I remember, like, we have a great core of friends, and Erin Burns is in that friendship group, Carly Ryan. We were all doing everything we could. And we remember having this conversation around, like, oh, like, why can't the world just give us one of those things? Like, I'd gladly take the second broken back, or just some of the things that she went through are horrific, and you wanted to take one away from her just so she could have a moment to catch her breath and you know, see where she's at herself. So yeah, it was extremely difficult to watch. Not as hard for her to go through, but extremely difficult to watch someone you love be in pain for that long.
Yeah, I can imagine. And in terms of coping with that adversity, we all have adversity in our own little way. Hopefully not anywhere near as bad as Kath, but were there some key lessons in the way you see how she went about a business then and how she does still now that you've taken into how you go about what you do?
Absolutely. It's hard not to be impacted by Kath just being in her presence. You get a gauge for who she is straight away. She's completely authentic to who she is, no matter what company she's in. She treats every single person the exact same way, which I just absolutely love and adore about her. She sees the best in everyone, and she gives everybody a chance and a second chance. So she's incredible in that way. I think her resilience, but also the way her outlook on the world hasn't changed. She's still, and it's what the kindness factory is, the essence of the kindness factory. It's just it's basically it's an image of her, a bigger projection of who she is. The first thing she did that got her on the path of recovery was ring every person that had helped her in her recovery and thanked them. And she got a really great sense of self-worth from having that connection with that person and just really respecting what that person had done for her. And kindness literally saved her life. And I'm a big believer in that. I'm a big believer in helping each other out, and the smallest thing you can do for someone can be the biggest thing in their day. So I think her attitude towards the world, towards people, she's never been resentful or had this victim mentality around what she'd been through. She just accepted whatever was dealt her way and did her best to get on with things, with still living the way she wanted to live and seeing the world the way she wanted to see it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I love that you mentioned how her self-worth became in helping others or being kind to others rather than adopting that victim mentality. And if we take that into whether it's cricket, work, life, quite often we get our self-worth from the external things. So we get our self-worth from, okay, well, how many runs did I score? Or you mentioned earlier, Hurricanes weren't going so well in the Big Bash, so you're feeling down and have your pity party. And our self-worth is so often on what we're producing, which I think is normal to an extent. But if we can redefine our self-worth to being what's in our control and how can we have a purpose that's impacting others, it makes such a big difference. And I don't have any concrete evidence, but in my experience so far and chatting to others, I think it has a huge impact on performance as well. So from your perspective, whether it's writing the book, whether it's connecting with incredible athletes, knowing Kath and going through that with her, how have you found that actually impact you on field?
I think it's just given me a huge amount of perspective. And it's funny you mentioned that self-worth struggle, because I've definitely had that throughout my career. I feel like, as I said, I grew up as quite a shy, introverted person, and sport was my playground. You know, like, I loved sport, and it brought out the best in me, and I could be who I felt like I was on the inside, but couldn't really express that when I wasn't competing in some way. And it's a really difficult balance to strike with all of that, because it obviously it's a great feeling, but you don't want to wrap your complete identity in sport and who you are on field, because when it does go bad, all of a sudden you lose who you are completely. And I've definitely battled that throughout my playing days. But I look back on the times that I've played the best and most consistently, and it's when I have balance. So it was exactly when I was doing the book, and that was a crazy time. I had no time at all for anything. It was run off my feet, but somehow being able to, like, have that energy and that connection with another project and other people who are thinking the same way you are, and doing something you feel good about, it made me excited to train, and I had more energy around what I wanted to do as a cricketer, as an athlete, as a leader, and it brought out the best in me on field. So I think that's why there's a huge emphasis now on this. Still, while we're progressing towards this professional realm of cricket, of making sure women and girls still have a passion outside of the sport, because it can be all consuming and it can take you to a really dark place if you let it. So I think we see a lot of that now. You see, Sophie Day has her art. You see a lot of people involved in community projects. And I think, you see the best in them, but it also allows you to see the person behind the athlete, and get a sense for who they are and why they maybe compete the way they do, or just to understand them even more. So, I think balance is hugely important in making sure that, you've got some stuff outside of cricket that gives you a sense of gratitude and satisfaction as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to know so most athletes tend towards the perfectionism side of things. Do you have that across the board? So is it something that in your drawing and in your sport, you're a little bit of a perfectionist? And then how do you actually balance that to the point where you can, as you said, you play your best or you draw your best when you're balanced? But if you're trying to be perfect in all things, is something that we see, especially in the young kids coming through. How do you balance that, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it makes complete sense. I think cricket is a sport that it attracts perfectionists, because it is an imperfect sport and you just want to be good at it all the time. It's impossible. So there's a constant challenge in there. I think in terms of cricket, I've found that really challenging because of the way I play. So I have a very different style to most batters. I can't hit a glorious textbook cover drive. I've tried for 20 years and it won't work for me. It's not my thing. So I had a lot of coaches for a really long time in my career try and mold me into someone I wasn't. And it was only when Sally Ann Briggs and Dan Marsh came on board at Cricket Tasmania where I felt like I could play and be who I wanted to be, and who I am. And that it was valued the same way as a meg letting cover drive over the cover boundary. My paddles and the way I play was valued to the same extent. So that made me sort of, or bring out the best in my performance, really, and it allowed me to take away that idea of being perfect and having a perfect game to be effective in the game. In terms of art, it's an ever-present thought. I actually don't keep a lot of the stuff I make. I often draw things for friends and family, and I get to a point where I got to get rid of it. Otherwise, I just end up overdrawing and overcomplicating and ruining it, really, because you're striving for something more each time. It could be better this way. It could be more realistic. It could be brighter. Contrast isn't right. There's 1,000 things that go through your mind, and if it's just sitting there, I'll just keep dabbling away until I ruin it. So it's best for me to do something and get rid of it as quick as I can. So it's interesting with the book. Actually, I haven't really gone back very often and looked at it, because I know I'll be like, oh, I could have done that better. I could have written that better. I wish I'd said this or all this sort of stuff. So it's a constant battle for me. I haven't got the answers for your listeners, unfortunately, but I think being comfortable with who you are probably plays into that, and the value that's placed on what you're giving to people around you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me anyway, it comes down to redefining bit corny, but redefining what success is. So like if you define success as having the perfect art piece or the perfect cover drive, as you said, it's gonna end badly. But if you can say, you know what, well, I've learned from this, I've impacted someone. As you mentioned, the purpose of female sport leaders, you're a leader within Cricket Tasmania or Sydney Thunder, helping the youngsters grow or helping your team grow, and by you embracing your imperfections or by you going on the journey and constantly learning from the imperfections, that's actually the result that you're after anyway.
Yeah. So I agree with that 100%. I think that's something I've become more comfortable with, and as I've got older, and I guess as my game has got accepted. And it was interesting working with Talia Wilson from the Thunder. I hadn't really spent a lot of time with her before, and we hit it off straight away. And I think she said to me, I remember we had a couple of conversations throughout the tournament, and she said to me, "I love watching the way you bat," and I hadn't really heard that before because I'd always thought my game was quite ugly. It's scrappy. I'm going to be diving for every run. I'm going to be, running on misfields. I play a really scrappy style of cricket that's not pretty at all. And I remember thinking, oh man, I don't think I've heard someone who doesn't really know me or whatever say that to me. So for me, I guess it was just a sign that, I don't know, you can be appreciated in different ways, and you don't have to just do everything to be successful in one certain way. I think I found that with leadership too. If you write down, the stereotypical qualities of a leader, you're assertive, you're direct communicator, you're the best in a team, all those types of things, I wouldn't tick any of those boxes. And I really struggled when I did get the leadership position because I didn't have any ambitions to be a leader. I like to do my job and sit in the background. I don't like the spotlight at all. And I found that really challenging, being who I am as a leader, especially following someone like Heather Knight, who captained the Hurricanes, who's one of arguably the best leaders in the world and best performers, best players. So initially I felt like I had to be like her, and then I sort of figured out through some trial and error that it wasn't effective for me to lead that way. It was transparent. I was never going to create real change or get the group to follow me. I had to be who I was. I was chosen for a reason, and I had to understand that those skills that I had were strengths as well. And I think it took me seeing someone like Jacinda Ardern in a completely different field, obviously in the political world, show those what are known as soft skills in empathy and compassion and kindness, and lead in a really powerful and strong way. And took a really tricky situation and she led that way through a very difficult time where things could have went a completely opposite direction than they did. And I think that made me think, oh, hold on, I have some of those skills and they can be powerful in the sporting world as well.
So if you put yourself back into a young 17-year-old Corinne dabbling around the New South Wales setup, and they're pretty bloody strong. They'd probably won 10 in a row by that point.
Yeah.
And pretty hard to crack, even though sport was your outlet. You loved sport, but it was almost near impossible for you to be a regular top order batter in that side. What do you think, or firstly, did you have any leaders in your life at that point that helped you guide your career, and what made them so good? And if you didn't, what do you wish you had as a 17-year-old in that position?
I think I've been extremely fortunate throughout my life, really, not just my playing career, to have really strong, particularly women around me who have definitely been mentors and leaders in my life. I think Kath is one of those outside of cricket. Erin Burns is one on field and off field. But I think around that time, I had Lisa Sthalekar, who was the captain of the New South Wales team at that point, and I was initially petrified of her. I was intimidated. I came from a place of real respect. I respected who she was as a cricketer and how she got there, and I just didn't really feel like I should be breathing the same air as her or be in the same conversation. So I literally put my head down. I trained as hard as I could. I followed her and Alex and Kate Blackwell around training all the time. I wanted to be a really good fielder, and I knew if I followed those girls, I'd be heading in the right direction. But Lisa on field and off field was part of the reason why I felt accepted in that group. She once I got to know her, I knew she was a bit of a dork and would have a laugh and knew when to turn on the seriousness and pull you into line, but also could make you feel really wanted, accepted for who you are in that sort of group and that elite company. I was playing with I think there was Erin Osborne and myself who weren't in the Australian team in that New South Wales team, and then Erin made it the following year. So it was a stacked side, and she just made me sort of work hard, but also feel like I could make it if I did the right things from that point on. So I had her initially, and then I played a lot of cricket with Heather Knight over in England and in Tasmania, and I love the way she leads. But I remember after I took over the leadership, it took her having a conversation with her around that cross of identity I had as a leader, and she just explained to me that she felt the same way, and she'd done a lot of work in terms of developing her leadership skills to get to where she was. So I think those vulnerable conversations that, she was brave enough to have with me and admit that she was in the same spot at some point, actually had quite an influence on how I saw my development as a leader and how I wanted to shape myself. So, I think I've been extremely lucky to have the people I have had around me for as long as I have.
And then, so as you mentioned, you struggled early. You were trying to be someone you weren't. What were the key changes that take you to a place that now you can say, well, actually, I'm owning who I am as a leader? What's the difference?
I think it's taken some honest conversations, from with my coach, with my players and teammates. But I think I've just being comfortable with who I am now, both on and off field. I think I've got more life balance, so I have that self-worth outside of cricket. So I know, and I think I've learnt different strategies for myself in how to handle myself in those situations. I guess the self-awareness level's gone up, but that's only come from those vulnerable conversations that I was able to have with people. So I think it's still ever evolving for me. I don't think leadership and the spotlight will ever be something that I'm overly comfortable with, but I'm happy with how I do things. And I guess that's been shown by some of the impact I've had on some of the younger players. So I think that's where I've got a lot of my satisfaction from being a leader, is having, trying to steer those girls in the right direction, the way I was steered, and was lucky enough to have those people around me initially.
Would you dabble in, like, back to illustration, but still in the leadership scheme, but like doing something on female leaders from around the world? So, like,
Yeah,
Malala, I'm thinking Malala, Michelle Obama, Jacinta Ardern.
yeah, absolutely. I think I don't know, celebrating women is something I'm really passionate about. If that makes me a feminist, I guess I'm a feminist. But I just think there's some really great untold stories out there across multiple industries. I mean, I think there's such a interesting shift happening in the political world at the moment, and that's even drawn me in. Like, I've looked back at Julia Gillard and the experience she went through as our prime minister. And I think it's quite shameful what she had to go through as a female Australian, let alone someone in the position she was, how she was treated and how differently she was treated. I think I'm passionate about lots of different areas of what females have done across multiple industries. But worldwide, I'd love to do something like that. I mean, I had a list of 150 Australian female athletes, so there's probably still be scope for another couple more Victress. Anytime we get to celebrate a woman who's done well, I'll take the opportunity to do so.
So I'm just thinking how incredible it could be if, because I know you had launch night for Victress, the first version anyway, where you had some huge names, Lauren Jackson, Liesl Jones. Did Dawn Fraser fly in from Berlin?
Yeah, that was incredible. That was one of the most amazing experiences in the book, or with the book project, really, is getting to just meet some of those people and talk to some of those people. And the thing that overwhelmed me was the extreme humility and the humble nature of every single one of them. There was no obstruction to do any of it. And it wasn't because they wanted to celebrate themselves. They were so happy that women were being celebrated. And a couple of the people, like Anna Mears, she couldn't believe she was actually included in the book. And I was like, do you understand the impact
Crazy
and what you've actually done? But Dawn Fraser was a real highlight for me. Before we got the book published, we obviously wanted to get everyone's approval to be included in the book, and obviously get that kindness quote. And I think it was the night before the deadline of the book going to print, and we hadn't heard back from Dawn. She's not on Instagram or Twitter or anything like that, so she was a little bit more difficult to get a hold of. Old school, which I like, actually. But she ended up calling the night before the deadline, and she had about a 25-minute, 30-minute conversation with her, and she was thrilled something like this was going ahead. She thought it was overdue and that more needed to happen. She rattled off a few statistics around how successful female Olympians had been in comparison to men, and she thought it was a stat that should be out there for everyone to know. And she was exactly how you imagine her to be, with a great sense of wit and humor as well. But yeah, she actually flew in from, there was a world sporting awards event in Berlin, and she flew in the morning of that to be at the launch, which is a testament for how much she values celebrating these women and how integral a part she is in making sure that the legacy of these women continue on. But she was absolutely phenomenal. She's I'd love to have her as one of my best mates. I'd love to catch up with her for a red wine every weekend. She's brilliant.
I can imagine she'd be pretty entertaining. But I'm just thinking, like, imagine down the track, I can see you imagine having a launch at the World 20 Summit, and you've got Jacinta Ardern, you've got I can't remember the one from Germany, but all these
Chancellor, yes, she's amazing. She's incredible. Angela Merkel,
that's the one, Merkel.
Yeah,
having all these incredible women leaders, and Corinne's there as one of them. That'd be pretty cool.
But I'll be happy to fade in the background of that one.
But at the same time, like, we're talking about the big names, your Dawn Frasers, your Lauren Jackson, Meg Lanning, Elise Perry, but there are some people within the book that aren't big names, and I think, from my perspective anyway, that's kind of half the point, in that we're bringing some light to the incredible achievements and processes and kindness that these athletes have achieved, and some people you've just never heard of. And is there anyone in particular that stands out to you that you're like, you know what, I barely knew about you before, but now it's just mind-blowing?
Yeah, I'm so glad you touched on that, Barbie, because that was definitely a conscious decision of, making sure I was including people across different generations, across different sports, team sports, Olympic sports, all those types of things. I'm glad you said that. I think Louise Savage is one that stands out for me. I know she's celebrated a lot in some capacity, but not to the extent she should be. She was a phenomenal lady, both on the athletic track and off it, and she's become a real advocate for people with disabilities. I think she's one that stands out straight away. I think Ellie Cole, in the same vein, she's one of our most successful Olympians, and we don't know as much about her as we should. And I don't know, there's stories throughout the entire book where Rochelle Hawkes, with the things she experienced throughout her journey as a hockey player and as a leader of a group, and the politics that were involved in all of that. Gay Waterhouse was an interesting inclusion because she I guess, I don't know, doesn't typically suit an athlete, but the impact she's had on that sport is phenomenal, and the way she's sort of bringing people through that now is incredible. Kari Webbs, I know she's quite well known too, but again, it was similar to hearing a bit about, when I was hearing about her story, I sort of could resonate a lot with her relationship with her grandmother, and the impact that had on her playing career, and sort of the struggle she had as well. But I think the big one for me was Heather Mckay. She's a squash player, and she played for 20 years and lost 2 matches, which I think is astounding. She led the way worldwide in a sport that wasn't really recognised in squash, and I just think what she achieved is phenomenal, and to not know her name. And I love sport, and I love female sport. I'd like to think that I'm quite passionate about and quite across a lot of that, and I hadn't heard of her until I sort of researched this project. So for me, she was the real highlight, and I was glad we could celebrate what she'd achieved.
2 games in 20 years, that's just ridiculous.
Insane, isn't it?
Insane.
It's remarkable to be that dominant for that long. Like, you see people like Serena Williams, who's the best that's ever been, and she's lost a couple more than 2, but it's phenomenal.
Yeah, you think, like, if it was any major sport, like squash isn't a big sport, but if it was anything remotely major, there'd be statues of her everywhere. We'd have stadiums named after her. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, at the end of the day, she's done the same amount of work, the same processes, probably fought the same battles as every single one of us. But she doesn't quite get that external recognition. But it's, 1, really cool that you can bring that out, but 2, it's still really cool to follow. Like, it's still a great story that if someone who's a 15-year-old kid can go and actually read this, be like, you know what, I haven't got a state contract. I'm not on all the Instagram feeds and out there for everyone to see, but I can still go about my business and do it to the best of my ability. That's the gold.
Yeah, it's absolutely, it's something for everyone, isn't it? It doesn't matter who you are, or what personality type you are. There's always a way that you could be successful. It's just about finding what the right path is for you.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's great. I love that you touched on that.
we talk a lot to our, and I'm sure you have the same experience with cricket, where you've got the youngsters coming through and they have that obsession with the contract, or they're in the academy or the under-19s, and it's all about getting the contract. Whereas trying to drill into them, it's actually like become obsessed with progression. Like
Mm,
just become obsessed with progression. I think sometimes what you're doing in highlighting those that aren't just the big names that everyone knows about, we start to highlight what it means to just become obsessed with being better. And that's healthy. I think that is healthy.
yeah, I totally agree. I think comparison's a huge spiraling black hole that you can get really easily caught up in, especially in an individual team sport such as cricket. You know, like it's driven by statistics. You can't escape it. You cannot escape your performance ever.
So we talk about the youngsters, and you were one of them. I was one of them at some stage, pursuing something that we both loved. But if you could go back to that little Corinne when she was in the New South Wales underage setup, loving sport, potentially leaning towards some perfectionism, growing with a program as it became more professional. So we've got all the noise of a professional program as well. What would you say to that little girl that's coming through now to give them the best chance of succeeding on and off the field?
I would say give up on the cover drive, be who you are, because it's just as good or better than what you think. That would be my main message to her. I think um, value the strengths that I do have because they will get me to where I want to be.
Absolutely. And some final questions that we ask most of the guests that come on the podcast. The first one, which I think we've covered a fair bit, but what is the impact that you'd like to have on the world?
I think I'd just like to positively impact every person that I touch or meet. I think I've been lucky enough to be surrounded by people who have done that to me, and if I can repay that in some way and lead a really good, sort of meaningful, connected life, I'd be very happy with that.
And how would you define success now? Has it changed since you were, say, around 20?
Yeah, absolutely. Success to me meant trophies, medals, ribbons, all the sort of stereotypical things that you think about when it comes to success. But now, for me, it's whether I had an impact on the people around me. Did I give it everything I had? And am I happy with who I was throughout that whole process? I think that sort of sums up success for me.
That's brilliant. And before I ask the final question, better just plug the book. So where can we find the book if we want to purchase it?
We have an Instagram page called Victress Book, and you can get the link through the bio there to buy it. It's at Booktopia and all other good bookstores, as people say when they have a book out. But yeah, get onto the Victress Book website. That's probably the easiest way to grab a copy. Yeah, I think it's great for anyone who's got a young niece or a nephew even. It's great to get young boys educated around what females have done for their sports too. I mean, we wouldn't have the bowling style we have today in cricket if it wasn't for a female and trying to get around her skirt when she was bowling. So it's a book for young kids everywhere. So yeah, if you love sport, try and get your hands on a copy.
Yeah, I'd certainly recommend it. And we do have a lot of listeners who love the personal development side of things, who love reading about mindset, psychology. And I do highly recommend your book also for the text within it. And then the storytelling is so, so powerful, and particularly the pieces on kindness. And we know how powerful that is in having that perspective, but also helping you on field. So I couldn't recommend it anymore from that perspective as well. And a final question is, who is Corinne at her best?
Ooh, how am I at my best? I think I'm someone who's always giving to those around me who I care about, who is courageous in being vulnerable and open, and having a growth mindset. So not letting fear hold me back from anything that I feel like I want to or should do.
So it's not the cover drive in that perspective.
No, it's not at all.
No, I love that. Look, Corinne, thank you so much for coming on. I think the irony sometimes of you writing this book, and we've talked a lot about your illustration, but you could well and truly be one of the first people in the book on the impact that you've had on people within cricket, outside of cricket, females, males, and I think the Australian population in general with what you've done and what you're continuing to do. So thank you so much for coming on, and I'm so excited to see what you produce next.
Oh, thank you so much for your kind words, Barbie. That's very sweet. I'm thrilled that I could be part of this. I love what you're doing and the exposure you're bringing to athletes and leaders and sport. I think it's brilliant. So keep tracking on with what you're doing. If you ever need an illustration of anything, just let me know.
Absolutely. We might get you onto some of the podcast guests.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, mate.
Thanks, Barbie. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in. If you want to continue to be part of the Inside Edge project, hit subscribe or leave a comment below. We're also on all major social media platforms. I look forward to having you along next time.